You've never dated an Indian girl?
Honestly, no.
That's funny. I always go for the blondes.
Really?
I've actually only dated white guys before.
We're both brown people that only date white people.
Hey guys, Tazzy Faye here. How is it going? This video is not about Love is Blind, but we got to talk about it for a second. Love is Blind is a show on Netflix where contestants, for romantic reasons, they go into these little pods, talk to potential suitors, partners, and basically decide whether they want to be with somebody without even looking at them. So they'll like propose to them and then they can have a wedding at the end and whatnot. Not everybody who goes on gets selected, but anyway, there were some notable couples this season, one of which was a South Asian couple, Sheikh and Deepti. Now, Sheikh was definitely the villain of this probably whole show of all seasons. He was pretty embarrassing. There's a point where they're talking to each other and they say, you know, I've only ever dated white people. And people got really riled up about that. Now, it's not the first time we've seen South Asian people on screen talk about their preferences for white folks and then get backlash for it. As you know, we do have a obsession with fair skin. I don't know if that has something to do with it. I did do a video also on the Desi inferiority complex. Don't know if that has something to do with it, but it could also have absolutely nothing to do with it. So for today's video, I want to dive into dating preferences, attraction, romantic interests, individual choice, and the role of media, and why all of this is so controversial. Perspective of this video is going to be from somebody who is South Asian and lives in America, so, you know, take it with a grain of salt, however you want to take that. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? Bam, bam. So to start off, let's talk about the paradox of preference. Now, the whole Sheikh situation got me thinking, is it a bad thing to have a preference on who you're attracted to or who you want to date? I think it would be a lie to act like we're above physical preferences and that we can see deep into each other's souls and that's how we choose to interact with people in the world. But it definitely doesn't look good when you outright say that you're only attracted to one certain race or that you're not attracted to one specific particular race. Now, I think at the root of the whole ethical aspect of right and wrong when it comes to romantic preferences is more about why we're attracted to certain people and not others. Here's an interesting video that I found that helped me in my research when I was trying to think about these questions.
Aside from the fact that most people prefer someone of the same race, you see that across the board, white men do really well with women of all races. And by that I mean white men are more likely to be considered attractive and they're more likely to get a reply when they send a message, while the odds for black and Asian men are really low. When it comes to the ladies, white and Asian women score really well and black women fare badly.
If you watch the video, it basically ends by saying that society and the way that racial groups are presented to us probably do have an impact on our romantic preferences. That being said, is it racist to prefer and only marry your own kind? Data says that people do prefer to stay within their own race and ethnicity. If you've heard of the concept of unconscious bias or affinity bias in particular, it's basically this idea that we give preference to people who are like us. That's who we gravitate towards, that's who we want to be around. So it does make sense that that would kind of bleed into your romantic relationships and preferences. It makes sense, right? Like you want to do less work. Aren't relationships hard enough? You want to fight with everybody? I want to marry this guy? I don't know. Stuff to do that, just saying. But at the end of the day, no matter how much you want to flip it, it's still bias. It's prejudice by nature. The same person who was featured in that video that I showed earlier also had this infographic that she made. So you can see the different interracial and interethnic marriages in the US, kind of the rise over the years. So I think it can be racist to only date within your own race. It goes back to what are your reasons for that? But I don't think that that's a hard and fast rule. So then the question comes up, when it comes to someone like Deepti and Sheikh, who are like, I only date white people, I've only ever dated white people. Is it self-hate if you don't want to date your own people? I went through a period of time where I openly shared my preferences, and I can tell you that South Asian, Pakistani, Indian, whatever, was not one of them.
Like literally these things would come out of my mouth. I'd be like, yeah, I'm not gonna marry a Desi person. Yeah, I'm probably gonna marry an Arab.
Now when I look back, I feel like I definitely had some sort of inferiority complex, which I'm not. I mean, I got married to an Indian guy, but I'm not completely over my inferiority mindset, I think, in some ways. So I'm not going to act all sanctimonious and act like none of these things have ever affected me, because they have. But Sheikh, who was the villain in the show, it really did appear like he had some sort of identity issue, like for sure. Deepti, I'm not sure. So, and people could be like, that's unfair. You're being unfair because she's a girl. But you know what? I don't know. She wasn't really painted in that bad of a light. I feel like for her, maybe it was an inferiority complex. All of this though, like, let's be honest, I think it's a muddy argument because we as human beings, we fall in love. We follow our hearts. We have individual choice. We have free will, if you believe in that. So it's like, how would you know? How would you know what someone's intentions are? Just by psychoanalyzing them? I mean, we're really bad at reading people. And I think that's why minorities yell so loud about representation, because how we're presented on screen affects how people see us. Speaking of representation, let's talk about the brown people falling in love with the gorelog on screen and why it's such a contentious thing. Why people lose their minds over it. I only date white people. South Asian romances and media's role in it all. First thing to establish, interracial marriages have always been controversial. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. And if we're talking about the US specifically, I mean, it wasn't until 1967 that it was even legal in this country to do that. There was a very famous case, Loving versus Virginia. It was the first case that went to the Supreme Court and it legalized interracial marriage. That's crazy. 1967? That's not that long ago, dude. But I'll be honest, okay? When I watch a movie like Lagan, which is not an American movie, it's a movie about the colonized sticking it to the colonizer, to the British, and playing their game better than them and making them tax-free, if I remember it correctly. And I'm not gonna lie to you, although Gory Lori over here was helping out, okay? She was helping them, she was giving them, feeding them information, teaching them how to play the game against her brother. I was looking at you, Amir Khan. I was like, you better not leave Miss Gory over here for Gory Lori. We were rooting, who were we rooting for? Ore Chori, that's who we were rooting for. Because I'm gonna lose my shit. So when does something that's an individual choice become a societal problem? I think in our world today, media has a lot to do with it. So let's talk about South Asian American romances on screen. Mindy Kaling, The Mindy Project. I'm gonna be lying to you if I said that I didn't thoroughly enjoy that show, because I did. It would soothe me before I went to sleep, okay? I love that show, I do. And I really do like Mindy Kaling. And I think in more recent years, she has kind of gone more of going back to, giving opportunities, diverse opportunities, whatever it may be. But in her show that she had 6 seasons, I mean, she seemed like she was in control of the show, for sure. 20 out of 21 love interests were white, which is fine. She can date whoever she wants on the show. But like really, like 20 out of 20, that's pretty bad. That does not look good. So I get why she got some flack for that, for sure. Kumail Nanjiani, he has a movie called The Big Sick. It was really critically acclaimed. It did really well, I think, especially with white audiences. The movie is about choosing the white girl against his family, against his culture, against everything pretty much. I had not watched the movie. I watched it last week. I had read some things before I watched the movie like a while ago when it came out. So I was expecting it to be a lot worse than I felt it was. I didn't feel like it was as bad as people made it out to be. I don't know, like this is just my take on it. I felt like he was just sharing his story. I'll get into that, but I can see like there were moments like this moment here where I was like, okay, dude, like now you're just kind of making brown women look like clowns. And
the truth is out there.
It's from the show.
And the whole like, oh, like just dropping by, like rishtas don't drop by like that. The rishta process is pretty formal and usually parents are there too. I mean, that's at least what I think. Like they're not going to do magic tricks in front of a potential suitor's parents. Like that's not going to happen. Maybe they were just trying to be funny, but I can see like why people were mad, but I felt like people were too mad. Maybe I need to give it another watch. But anyway, so Hassan Minhaj stand-up special. So he talks about falling in love with like this white girl and her family kind of, like the whole racism thing coming up. And he talks about how it's a formative experience of his life, but then, he ends up marrying an Indian woman at the end of the day. Now, after watching that, I enjoyed the special. I didn't think anything was wrong with it. That was my opinion from watching it, but we'll get into it. Now, Aziz Ansari, like I mentioned, haven't watched the show, but he's gotten criticism about he always goes for the white girl or something. I don't know, whatever. But I want to say this before I get into the next part of this. I feel like we're so critical of people in American media who are minorities because unfortunately, due to the lack of representation, their stories tend to represent us even if we don't want them to. No matter how diverse we are, even racially, ethnically, linguistically, whatever, all the thieves. People don't understand that in the US because there are so few stories from our perspective that are shared with mass media. And if they are, they're kind of like watered down so that white people can understand them. But I feel like this problem will go away the more that there are stories shared. The more stories there are, the less there is a focus on one, and it can just serve as, you know, that person expressing themselves or sharing their life rather than it being a political statement, if that makes any sense. I guess with great power comes great responsibility. So then it becomes, are these brown people just falling in love on screen, or are they making a statement? And who's it at the expense of? Brown women, brown men, somebody else? Are they making a statement that they see their own people less than, that they see their own women less than, or their own men less than? So I came across this article that brought up an interesting point. So I'm going to read it. So this is talking about Kumail, Hassan, and Aziz Ansari. All three comedians are adept at talking about race and their experience of being raised Muslim in this country, and can't necessarily be expected to represent experiences or desires besides their own. But nevertheless, they do end up appealing to a certain familiar fantasy of manhood. And this fantasy doesn't have much room for South Asian women. Their choices are a reflection of the stubborn limitations of an industry where straight men still dominate, and where whiteness remains an integral component to what love looks like on screen. Now, this really stuck out to me because I've heard this myself. I remember I had a conversation with a brown guy. This was a long time ago. We were talking about someone who had ended up with a white lady or something like that. He was basically saying that a white woman, getting to be with a white woman is like the ultimate fantasy or experience of a brown man. It's a symbol of achievement almost. Now, this may not represent all brown guys, but I think there's definitely a fantasy element to it, especially if you look at Mindy Project. I can definitely see that as well there. Now, fantasy. Where do fantasies come from? Does it come from being colonized and oppressed? I don't know. I'm just kidding. Anyway, I don't know, but good point. All right, anyway, moving on. So in conclusion, I think there's a lot of nuance on the topic. We can't assume we know everything. We know all the intentions behind why people do what they do. We're not all knowing and we're not all seeing. But we can't dismiss the fact that history and politics have an impact on the way that we see ourselves and the way that we see other people. When it comes to our romantic choices, it is whatever's in your kismet. And that kismet is determined by an infinite amount of moments and decisions that lead up to it all. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe. And yeah, that's all I have for today. Tazzy Faye, out. Bye.